Joining me now from Irvine, California is Mazen Al-Sheikha. He is the chairman of the India Development Center, a Baghdad-based economic think tank. He is also a former advisor to the Iraqi government. And from London, we're joined by Shwan Zulal. He is a business and political consultant with expertise in the Kurdish region of Iraq. Gentlemen, thanks to both of you for joining us. Shwan Zulal, let me start with you. And if we look at the battle that's being fought in northwest Iraq, we are seeing more cooperation now between Iraqi National Army forces as well as Peshmerga forces, which are Kurdish forces. Is that what is turning the tide against Islamic State in that part of Iraq?
Well, thank you for having me. Well, the reality is, I think what really turned the tide, although that's part of it, what you mentioned, is the American involvement and the airstrikes from the drones and the F-18 fighters. Since June, as we know, where the Iraqi army couldn't hold back ISIS, and then in July, the Peshmerga forces were overwhelmed by ISIS too. And within a couple of weeks, the American airstrike has started, and what we've seen immediate, within a few days, the ISIS advances were stopped, and now we see the tide is turning. And let's not also forget the supply of weaponry to the Kurdish Peshmerga, because I mean, the Iraqi army are almost regrouping. But again, Iraqi army is not really on their own. We have the Shia militias who are aiding the Iraqi army. They're taking the initiative, because the Iraqi army, when they left Mosul and Tikrit and the northern part of Iraq, was completely disbanded their equipment, their ranks, and a lot of them were dispersed. They're just reuniting the army now. They're trying to get people together, but still the real fighting force are the Shia militia from the Iraqi army. And then you have the American airstrike. But in the north, Peshmerga has been supplied with weaponry from Germany, from US, from a few other European countries, among them Australia as well, who have joined to aid the Kurdish Peshmerga with air capability, transporting ammunition, logistics, and so on. And that has sort of made a huge difference. And now what we saw the retaking of Mosul Dam in the north of northern Mosul, and then what we saw, the siege of Amrili, which is the Shia town which was under siege by ISIS, was broken by cooperation between the Peshmerga forces and the ISIS group.
Okay, let's go to Mazen Al-Sheikha in California. Mr. Al-Sheikha, you hear there that American airstrikes playing a key role in pushing back Islamic State, but is it going to be just airstrikes that's going to do it, or is it going to be American ground forces that are going to be needed to defeat them?
Thanks again for hosting me here. Of course, the American airstrikes were extremely vital in turning the tide against ISIS. But it does need a cooperation of all Iraqi armies with a plural, because we have the National Iraqi Army headed by the central government, and the Iraqi army that is headed by the Kurdish regional government. Plus, we have, unfortunately, several other militias that have popped up here and there, which are also assisting the national army. U.S. airstrikes, like I said, are vital. However, it just takes the troops on the ground to take the land and maintain the land. You can probably liberate a city, but unless you can actually convince the locals there that you are liberating, that the force that is liberating you represents you. There are cities, unfortunately, that when ISIS came in, they considered ISIS the liberators. So what we have is a political problem as well as a military aspect to it. The political problem is to get the Iraqis to work together, not as Kurds and Arabs and Shiites and Sunnis, but under the flag of the country of Iraq, and all brigades report to the Ministry of Defense as one army to liberate Iraq from all militias, all ISIS, all Al-Qaeda, basically all terrorist groups that do not believe in the political process, that do not believe in democracy, that do not believe in tolerance and accepting other faiths and other religions and other sects and other races. We believe in inclusion, and under one flag, all Iraqis can unite and move on to rebuild their country again.
Okay, Shwan Zulal, we hear there that the ISIS forces may be on the retreat right now, but ultimately, as Mazen al-Sheikh says, is this a political battle?
Well, yes, true. I mean, I fully agree. I mean, the emergence of ISIS is a failure of the politicians in Iraq and in the region. What we've seen in the last few months since the election is the classic bickering and squabbling between Iraqi politicians in particular for juggling for power. And after all, the Prime Minister Maliki has left now. Well, he's still Prime Minister, but he sort of made way for his successor, which is he's trying to form the new government. And as he's been trying, I think he has another 10 days to form the Iraqi government. And he's facing all the same challenges, trying to get all the groups. I mean, the last 8 years has been a disaster for Iraq under the leadership of the current Prime Minister, Nouri al-Maliki. He disenfranchised all the elements of the Iraqi society, the Sunnis, the Kurds, and even within Shia alliances, there's been problems because of his leadership. So it was a complete failure of leadership in Iraq, and the new Prime Minister is promising, but so far we haven't seen really much progress. We've seen a lot of good statements and talk, but the reality on the ground is very difficult. I personally don't see a very quick solution for Iraq's problem. It will take quite some time because it took 8 years of destruction, 8 years of mistrust between all the different groups. And now you have, as Mazen rightly spoke, some areas where ISIS come, they saw them as liberators. And this is a example of how the leadership, the political leadership in Iraq has failed. But let's also, I mean, I just wanted to sort of expand on it. ISIS is not only an Iraqi problem. ISIS is a regional problem, especially in Syria. The international failure of international community.
Some would say that it's actually an international problem.
Well, yes, exactly. I mean, it started from a regional problem, and now it's becoming international. As we can see all these elements from abroad. We see hundreds of fighters from Europe, US, and South America, from all over the world, to join in this deranged group who the ideology is despicable. But I think the problem originated from Syria, and then now in Iraq, and then slowly will spread. I mean, if you put it in context, I mean, these ISIS, the Islamic State, they're at war with pretty much everyone now. They're at war with Iraq, Iran, Syria, US, you name it, and all the militia, Lebanon. You have PKK, you have the Kurds in Syria, the PYG. So ISIS is really at war at all these fronts, but they're still managing to hold on. And this is, as I mentioned earlier about the US involvement. I think US involvement have helped to turn the tide in Iraq. And yes, we need ground forces and people to hold ground. But the reality is the ideology and the individual who fight with ISIS, they're not scared of death. Unless you have superior firepower to stop them, it's very difficult to fight them on the ground, because I remember talking to Peshmerga commanders being quoted. They're saying they want to die and have lunch with Prophet Muhammad, but the officers on the ground, the soldiers, the Iraqi soldiers, the Peshmergas, they want to go home to their families. They're not there to die. But so fighting against them is very difficult.
Right.
Especially if you have a similar equipment or similar weaponry, and you can't outmatch them by your technology and superior firepower.
Right. Mazen, is one of the problems here the fact that we don't see much evidence of a grand U.S. strategy here, a vision for that part of the Middle East that will tell us where the resolution is going to be, where it's going to come from, etc. The U.S. at this stage seems to be just responding to different crises on the ground. It seems to be ad hoc bombings as it goes along. We don't see a pattern here. We don't see where it's going in the end.
Well, that brings us to the problems that we faced with the Obama administration worldwide, not just in Iraq. The red line that he drew in the sand with Syria using chemical weapons was not followed through. What happened in Ukraine, another part of the world. But we're only here to discuss really Iraq, and we are all Iraqis are very thankful for U.S. air support to get rid of this international. You are rightly so when saying that this is an international problem. ISIS, actually, I look at the ISIS fighters as victims also of the societies they came from. So U.S. also has the added responsibility of understanding the societies, the Persian Gulf societies where those fighters come from. They do come from very wealthy families, believe it or not. And they, as Mr. Shwan rightfully said, that they're willing to die and have lunch with the Prophet, leaving those very nice and wealthy and cozy families. So there is a major problem within those societies in the Persian Gulf where a person would leave Saudi Arabia or Kuwait or Yemen to come join a fight that has no cause, has no political program. They don't know what the end game is. Do they want to build a country? Do they want to build an estate? Do they want to rape women? Do they want to they don't know what they're fighting for, but this is the core problem. Unfortunately, it doesn't only exist in the Persian Gulf. Like Mr. Shwan rightfully said, the European societies also have those people, those sick-minded men who are choosing to join the fight in what they call Islam, which is obviously not Islam, not Christianity, not any religion. So this is the core of the problem. Right. There are people who are sick-minded, who are trying to change the world in a direction they're not aware of. Within Iraq context, we as Iraqis should not prepare the environment to make it, or the climate, ready for these sick-minded people to build their state on. We have to work as one country against any terrorist from any religion, from any state that will infiltrate our country. We should protect our borders. We should have a political solution within all factions of the Iraqi society in order to prevent other peoples from coming in.
Shwan, talking about a climate where anything can happen, there is a question that is being raised again and again over the past few weeks, and that is whether Iraq can stay as a unitary state, or will we see some kind of partition? Probably a high level of federal government in Iraq, where you'd see the Kurds having a lot of autonomy, the Sunnis having their own kind of little mini-state with its own autonomy, and then the Shias in Baghdad.
Well, at the moment, I mean, that idea seems very plausible, and it looks like the right way to go. I mean, the Kurds, anyone who's been to northern Iraq and Kurdistan region of Iraq, they realize it already is like a state, it operates like a state. It has all the trappings of a state, but still not recognized, or it hasn't separated from Iraq. It has its own parliament, it runs its own political, economic affairs. The only ties with Baghdad has been the budget. Iraq has a lot of oil. I mean, that's where the problem stems for. If you divide Iraq into three separate states, what do you end up with two regions, the Kurds and the Shia region, having oil, and the third one having very little, and is going to be landlocked as well as Kurdistan. So that is going to be problematic. And ISIS and ideologies like that, extremist ideologies in sort of economically derived state like Sunnistan or whatever you want to call it, is going to be an issue. So the current way of thinking and to get out of this problem is there's been confederation has been mentioned to give the region more powers, but keep it within the country and keep the Iraq intact, but give the region more power, because the power sharing and trying to give quotas, so many ministers for this party, so many ministers for this ethnicity or this religious group, it hasn't really worked. We had 10 years of this shenanigan in Iraq, and all we ended up with was this bloodshed and bloodbath is currently going on. And this is not new. Iraq's history has been tumultuous since its inception. Right. And I guess it has been really filthy.
Yeah, I guess time to look for an alternative solution. We're going to have to leave it there, gentlemen. Time's caught up with us. Shwan Zulal, Mazen Al-Sheikha, thanks for joining us.